Thanks everyone for tuning in today to check out our podcast, Maker Connect. My name is Matt Despins, and I'll be your host for the show. With me today, we have Sardor Akhmedov. Sardor is currently Chief Revenue Officer and co-owner at Jafton, and no doubt has some interesting thoughts and perspectives to share. Sardor, if you're okay with it, let's start by hearing an overview about your career and your current projects so listeners can get just a sense about your negotiations and business experience. I will say, I can tell that you're a bit of a humble guy, but in this instance, it's the host who's asking you to brag a little bit, so your humility will remain intact. So with that, sir, I will turn it over to you so we can hear a little bit more about Sardor.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt, for having me on. I'm a tech entrepreneur. Been an entrepreneur my entire life almost. I had my first, so to say, profitable business when I was 10, selling video games in my middle school. I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs, so I was, second nature to me, looking up at my dad, and I became one. And my passion to technology also sparked on early, and I went on to pursue it and got into tech. My first probably tech business, so to say, was, if you can call it tech these days, back then it was more innovative, but
Sure.
it was an e-commerce store when I was
Okay.
back home. 16-year-old, I had an e-commerce store selling products from the US to Uzbekistan, where I'm originally from.
Okay.
So I was born and raised in Uzbekistan, and I came to the US when I was 16 for high school. And then during college, also had another e-commerce, business that eventually didn't work out, but got me into, other things that, connecting the dots now, looking back, I can see were worth it. So currently I am the co-owner of Jafton.com. We're a software development agency specializing in mobile app development. We have about 120 employees on staff, and we've been in business total of 10 years. So Jafton itself, the brand, has been for 4 years, but before that, it was a smaller agency under a different brand. So and we work with clients anywhere from medium to small size businesses all the way up to enterprise clients like Alaska Airlines, providing them with engineering help, right? Other than that, I love working on my social media, which is what I started recently, trying to tackle that,
Sure.
having more of a presence. And I'm based out of Miami. I moved here 3 years ago. So in my 9 years in the US, I lived in Massachusetts for the first 2 years, and then New York, then LA for half a year. Then recently, 3 years ago, moved to Miami. So that's where I'm based out of now.
Well, a couple of things. One thing actually that Sardor and I didn't talk about before the show started is, so I'm actually in Boston. So what part of Massachusetts were you in?
I was actually near Springfield. So
Okay.
I thought I was going to go to Boston when I was told that it's Massachusetts. The only place I knew was Boston when I was back in Uzbekistan. But it turned out to be actually a small town called Granby. It was right below.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, you know it? So
I actually do know, in my prior life as law enforcement, I had at a conference met a chief from there. So I do actually. Yeah.
Oh, really? Wow. Yeah, it's a tiny town of 2,000 people. So I went to a private boarding high school there,
Okay.
in Granby, and that was my first ever town I lived in the U.S. And honestly, I'm not a fan of small towns. I'm more of a big city guy, so I couldn't wait to get out and go to college in New York.
Yeah. Well, and now you're down in Miami, and there's some synergy there as well. One of our two founders is actually in Miami also. So I tend to like to go down there a little bit more in our winter, when but it's a beautiful area all the time.
Snowbirds.
So I want to back up to a couple of things here. So first off is, you did say you started your first company you did say 10 years old, so the listeners can hear that. 10, right?
Yes.
10. Yeah, I wasn't starting companies at 10. So that's incredibly impressive. So even in that early exposure, when you start a business, we all know that we're negotiating many things every day, not just business. Do you have recollection back then of being involved in negotiations even at 10 years old?
Yeah, I think it just came intuitive to me. I was a very shy kid, though. Don't get me wrong. I
Mm.
wasn't the go-getter or like the natural hustler. I was a hustler, but not a sort of like a very outgoing kid. I was very shy and extremely, on the back and not very much in the highlights type of kid, in my school. But I always wanted to sell, always wanted to make money. So what I did was actually, yeah, sort of my negotiation skills came also naturally because I had to sell. And if you're selling anything, you have to negotiate, right? Because people will negotiate with you. And it's in our blood, especially in our culture in Uzbekistan. Like you don't buy like anything just off of off the shelf. When you go to supermarket, it's more of a newer phenomena. I vividly remember when the first supermarket opened in our town. It was like fascinating to go to a supermarket and buy things just off the shelf as they are, because our traditional way of buying still is mainly going to what we call a bazaar,
Yep.
and we go and negotiate. You won't have like price tags. You'll just ask how much it is, and the negotiation is like the essential part of it. Literally buying a tomato at the bazaar, they'll tell you a price. You'll have to negotiate. Depending how much you're buying, and the amount of money you'll spend on it will depend on your negotiation skills.
Pandora's box, sir. You are the first guest we have ever had who literally might have negotiation in your blood. This just took this in a whole other direction, like a fascinating one. I am completely captivated right now. So we've got somebody here who not only started his first business at 10 years old, which inherently has negotiation built in, but in his culture, everything is being negotiated on in the bazaar. I have heard that terminology many times before. So let's start with an obvious question. If you look at the way that you were negotiating at 10 years old, call it in your first company, or even in day-to-day life at the bazaar, and or maybe how you saw your parents negotiating at the bazaar, how are you doing things differently now versus back then?
Yeah, of course, negotiating at the bazaar and negotiating at the professional scene in business probably is a little different, right? Where you don't fight for every penny, probably. But at the core, I think it's all human psychology, right? At the core, we all want to maximize the value we're getting from the deal, right? And a lot of it is perception, right? So a lot of the rookie mistakes I used to make in negotiation, I've learned now to be better at, right? For example, even in as small as reducing the price. I one point when I just started out, doing sales for my own business, whenever there was an objection or whatnot, or I see the deal is slowing down, I would just drop the price. Now it's actually the other way around, where I that's the last thing I try to do. I try to just increase the value first. If there's, it's all about perceived value. It's not about like the price tag, right? Although some cases, yeah, you will have like government projects that have a set budget. That's a different question, but they don't negotiate. They just give you the budget and say take it or leave it, right? It's a different beast. But back to your question of like how am I doing things differently? Well, it's still evolving, but that's one thing I learned: to increase value instead of dropping the price. And the negotiation and the price setting is all about like the perceived value, and also getting creative with value that you're putting on the table, right? Sometimes it can be a non-monetary value that people accept, because we negotiate all the time, not only with the client but also with the employees when negotiating a salary, right?
Yep.
And a lot of the times we'll offer things that are non-monetary because I'll tell you a case of how a few years back, when we were hiring our team overseas, because of the delta you can have on the price.
Yep.
That was our advantage. But after the pandemic, a lot of the global companies started going overseas themselves directly,
Mm.
and that created a huge inflation in price, right? So you'll have like global companies like Facebook come over to your region where we hire in Central Asia and up the prices for the engineers like tremendously. So then negotiation became even more vital because we can't compete with Facebook's on salaries, right? So we have to offer something more, right? So what we offer, for example, to our employees is that we say, hey, we're not Facebook where you're gonna be like one small part of a big, huge mechanism, but you can be a more meaningful part of the team because we're smaller, but there's a bigger potential for growth, faster potential for growth. So things like that. See how like now all of a sudden this is not a monetary thing, but we're offering something that could be a bigger value to the employee, right? Than just money, right? So that's another thing I learned is that you got to get creative with what you offer, and not just offer a random thing, but listen, right? Listen to what's important to the other party, be that a client or an employee. Ask them what their priority is, and then see how you can offer that to them in the deal. That may not cost you anything monetary, but because negotiation isn't about money only, right? It's just so much beyond it, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind that I learned.
Yeah, it's you're 100% correct. I love how you called that out because it's absolutely not just about money. And the common theme that you mentioned a couple times is something that we firmly believe in too. It's what we teach is it's not even just about value. It's about perception of value, right? Because two people can look at the exact same item and have very different idea of what the value of that item is. I'm going to value $1,000 very differently than, to your example, Google is, right? Those have very different values to us. And it is possible, people forget that a lot in a negotiation. It's very rare. But if everything that I own is not that valuable to me, and everything that you own is not that valuable to you, but we both feel the opposite about it, you can trade everything and everybody's happy. Now, that's an extreme example, right? But I love how you called out the looking at the value of things and trying to determine where the other side is coming from. And I won't harp on this, but was that, is that how in your culture you knew where to, we call that an opening position, right? Is that when you were talking about that tomato and they wanted $2, you wanted to pay 50 cents? How did you determine your opening position in that? Was it just, I'm
Specifically
going
in a
to say half of
bazaar
what?
or
Yeah. If
yeah,
you were in the bazaar, like, did you just
yeah,
have an idea of like, I'm just going to offer half, or was there a known
yeah.
standard in the culture?
It's funny. Honestly, I don't think there's a standard, right? Of course, I think it's all intuitive.
Hmm.
Obviously, when you first do it, it was scary to me. I remember as a kid, like, when my mom finally started sending me to bazaar by myself,
Yeah.
and then she'd obviously expect me not to just spend all the money and save some. It was scary because I was a shy kid, and but I think I just mimicked whatever my mom did, right?
Okay.
But she would like mention that, hey, I'm getting like, why don't I get like 3 kg instead of two, right? And you give me a better price, type of thing, right? And whatever just I heard, I would mimic, and then of course it's trial and error, right? Like you try to offer, but it's of course also intuitively you realize that you shouldn't overdo it. Oh, and back to that question, here's what I forgot to mention,
Oh,
what I
sure.
wanted to mention. Probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned in negotiation overall, and that came more recently in business, is sometimes I realized I've overdone negotiation with some people, and it was in some deals. Uh, uh, we used to have like subcontractors, right?
Mm,
Sometimes to do jobs that our team wasn't able to, like, catch up on.
mhm,
So we have a set budget from a client. Right now we need to subcontract to be able to make profit, right?
mm,
And we have to get a good price from them, so they would offer a price and we'd bring it down. So I realized sometimes we've overdone it and it backfired, because you don't always get out of the deal winning, even if you think you won in the price, because if that person isn't happy about the deal and you've overdone it, they're just naturally not going to have the type of motivation to complete the project, or give you the best value on what you agreed on, even if they say yes. A lot of people they just, you can break them psychologically,
mm.
but that's not the winning side on negotiating. I realized winning on price is not always winning the deal, because if my opponent is not getting out of the deal happy, then I haven't won long term. And that's another thing. Actually, you know what was the biggest lesson, tying it back to the
Mm,
bazaar? Every time you would finish a deal, I think our people are very wise. They would ask one last question, which in Uzbek it sounds "Razamasis," which means, "Are you happy with the deal?" Or
mm,
if you translate it like directly, or yeah, around, so like it's not the exact word "happy," but you get the point.
sure.
We always ask, even in by the way, it goes everywhere, literally in Uzbekistan and in our region. Even catching a ride on taxi, like you negotiate, and then getting out, both the driver and the passenger ask each other this question: "Are you happy with the deal?" Because we just know, I think, from our ancestors that we don't want to leave the other party unhappy with the deal. Even if it's a done deal, you're getting out of the taxi, it's such a small, trivial thing. You don't want to leave that person unhappy because it's bad energy. First of all, I think that's what they came from initially, but it also just backfires right at you and anytime. So whatever the deal you're finishing, you got to make sure that the other party is 100% happy with this deal and you haven't ripped them off, because it's going to backfire at you.
Single most interesting point of any podcast I've done is right now. I mean, a lot of great guests but this is fascinating because you have lived it in your culture. In the world of professional negotiations, we always talk about collaboration and trust building and whatnot to continue the deal. But here you are coming from a culture where in every interaction that involves a negotiation, you're saying to the person essentially, does this feel okay? Are we all right? Right? Like, are we okay? Not only because the act, like you said, a taxi driver, high odds you probably never see that person again, right? Maybe you do, but so not it's not even about the collaboration in your mind because of future business deals. It's also because bad energy, right? We feel like this just creates some kind of negative aura.
Absolutely.
I am fascinated with that because, again, one of the big talks is about giving the other party their winning story, right? To go back to their boss or their investors and say, hey, look at what I did, everybody being happy. But do you find yourself gravitating that way, like in your deals? Like, do you kind of strive to make sure that the other party, I can't pronounce that terminology, but do you find
Yeah,
yourself
yeah.
gravitating there?
Yes, absolutely. So now I do keep that in mind, because I've seen, kind of those deals where I thought I won, ended up not winning at the end, right? So it costed us more money to remake the whole thing, because I realized we underpaid the person and whatnot. So now, yes, absolutely. Every time I try to close a deal, both with the client and with the employees, both when I'm buying and when I'm selling, I try to think of, hey, this win for me will, the definition of a win in this deal will not just be me getting my terms that I want, but also making sure that the other party isn't leaving this with the bad terms. So yes.
It's funny, talking about value. One of the classic examples that I love is when you go to the car wash, maybe the deluxe version is $20, right? The inexpensive basic wash is 10. But guess what happens? If you buy the basic wash and you tip the attendant 3, you spend 13 and you still get the deluxe treatment, right? Because there's value there.
Exactly.
The attendant values that $3. So
Yeah.
yes, I love that establishing value part. It makes a lot of sense. You talked a lot about the negotiating with some of your internal folks, right? Your employees or whatnot. What do you see as some of the key differences of that internal negotiation versus with external partners or prospects?
Yeah, of course, it's probably harder to negotiate with external at the moment, because or maybe because I do that more often. I see that more often, because the hiring part is pretty much on autopilot this time,
Mm,
with our HR. But and plus, we're in a very competitive space where all of our potential leads are talking to many different companies. So negotiating there is a little harder. We're not selling something extremely unique, right? Although we try not to position it as a commodity, but rather than that, we try to present it more as a one of a kind service, right? Unique, to add um, some more unique parts to the offer. But you're asking about the difference, or which one is harder? You're saying,
Yeah, or maybe just some different thoughts and strategies.
yeah.
Like,
Hmm.
somebody who internal, maybe you're using a bit of a softer approach versus somebody who's
Mm,
external. Any of those thoughts you might have.
I see. I see. Um, yeah, like I said, that one thing is always there, even when negotiating with external or internal. I want to make sure that the other party is leaving happy with the deal. That's non-negotiable. Ironically, that's the word I'm going to use for me to do for with anybody. But other than that, um, with the internal, it's probably easier just because, especially now when the market has flipped, it's now no longer, I think, employees market like it
Sure.
was a year ago or 2 years ago with all the layoffs. So it has become easier to negotiate. So yeah, we either way, we try not to push anybody and squeeze them out anyway. So we do a soft negotiation, but where we get creative, so we're offering something unique to them. Yeah.
Other than dollars. I mean, you're right.
Yes.
People value things differently, right? And so I appreciate that. Um, when you think about, let's talk a minute, let's dive into the psyche of negotiations, which I know you said at the beginning, you really like. Let's talk about fear in negotiations. What do you think? What have you seen? Or maybe even what have you felt is out there as far as like fear? Like, what do you think people are scared of in negotiations?
Hmm. Great question. I think it depends on a deal, but if you were to generalize, in our case, a lot of people fear of being ripped off because it happens, unfortunately, a lot in our industry where a lot of companies will claim to be a good company,
Mm,
and then they're not, right? Or they're afraid of imposters,
mm,
scammers. Happens a lot, unfortunately, as well in any industry. I think there's
yeah,
scammers. My dad always likes to tell that this is, in his opinion, it's unofficial because there's no data on it, but he thinks the biggest industry with the most money fluctuating is the scammers industry, where they probably like steal people's money. So like I think a
yeah.
lot of people are afraid in deals of being scammed, of being lied to, being manipulated, right? Those are probably the usual suspects.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're right. I obviously don't have any data either, but to support that. But I would guess that that's probably a multi-trillion dollar operation.
100%.
Very, very, very well funded and thought through. So I would agree with that. And then I think a lot of times accompanying fear, you can see ego attached to that, right? As I said in the beginning, you strike me as a very humble guy, truly. I know you said you're very shy growing up, so that humility might be kind of baked into you a little bit. But when you're negotiating with another party externally, so call it a client or a prospect, um, are you typically finding people filled with ego in that negotiation? And how do you see that impact? What are your thoughts there?
Hmm. Um, yeah, it depends again, right? Everybody has different levels of ego. And I think that can be used against them a lot of times. That's one thing that I recently heard a story on. It's a relatively sad story because a very
Mm,
close person to me got scammed big time. And it was not just a regular scam, but it was like a huge, like a planned 8 month project for a big amount of money, and he became a target of that. And one thing that he mentioned to me was ego, actually, and that these people, because they're negotiators as well, right? As much as they have bad intention, because negotiation skills can be used either way. It's a tool, right? And they used ego big time to flatter the target, and that's what they apparently do. They flatter you. They find the right approach to use. They see what your weaknesses are, and then in the whole process of trying to get the money from you, they put your ego on top. They'll like make you feel like you're the top, you're the number one person, up until it goes like uphill, and then bam, drops the moment they scam you. And then you think, all of this, actually, how the hell did I get scammed? It hurts my ego. And that's what this person is sharing with me, is that, more than money, it actually hurts more that, this has happened to me. How are they able to scam me, right? It's a big thing. So yeah, I think ego is a big part, and I think it can be used both ways, if it's used correctly, especially if you notice somebody's ego is weak. um, Obviously you shouldn't manipulate in a bad way, but if there's some leverage on that, can be used, it should be considered, I think, in the negotiation, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a strategy that you take into account in analyzing the other side's strengths and weaknesses, right? And the value of what they have. What you said about ego is also really fascinating, because it's so true that scammers in this instance, or anyone who's trying to manipulate in general, you have to be doing it to somebody who inherently believes that they are good enough to be receiving that praise or that deal or what have you. And so that's not usually going to work on somebody who has low ego or low self-esteem, because that person's going to be like, why do you think I'm so special? But the person who has the ego is like, I'm pretty special. I should have all of these things coming to me. So
So
that I am genuinely sorry to hear about your friend. I mean,
yeah,
I just, as my previous life as a police officer, I just heard those stories so much. So condolences for sure.
yeah,
Is hopefully he's doing okay and kind of
yeah.
reprocessing through it.
It's a big lesson. Yeah. And
The hardest, usually the most painful ones are
yeah,
some of the biggest
yeah,
ones, right?
for
Yeah.
sure.
Speaking about art versus science, I can see that you probably have both sides to your approach there. There's a lot of schools of thought out there with negotiations about it being more of an art or more of kind of a data analytical science process. Which side of that fence do you typically fall on more, would you say, in your typical negotiation?
Art versus science,
Yeah,
right?
art versus science. I mean, I think that it's, probably some combination of both, but where do you typically lean more towards? What do you experience?
Okay. So as far as I understand this question, I think that this can also be referenced and compared to, sort of like your left and right brain, right?
Sure.
The analytical, like you mentioned, versus the feeling, right?
Hmm.
And I've read many psychology books. So
Yeah.
one of the simplest books on this is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, right?
Yep.
By Mark Manson.
I've read that book. Yep. The Subtle Art
Yeah,
of Not
it's
Giving a Fuck.
fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah, fantastic books.
Yep.
And either in that book or his following book, he mentions that you have two brains, right? Obviously, and same concept as in the Thinking Fast and Slow book, right? Which is more scientific. But in this book, he explains it very simply. He basically says, imagine a car, which is your brain, and you have a driver and you have a rear seat passenger. So you think that your thinking brain is in charge and is driving the car, but it's actually the feeling brain, how he calls it, is driving the car, and the thinking brain is actually the rear seat passenger that just tells go left, go right, but the feeling brain is the one deciding. But we all perceive as if we're the thinking brain. That's what decides, right? So I think in the core, as much as you yourself plus the opponent on the negotiation in the negotiation, you think they're thinking, they're actually deciding by their feelings, right? So
Hmm.
as important as it is to make decisions with your thoughts, it is, but you have to consider that the other party, just like yourself, they're a human and they make decisions by their feelings. So that's why building a rapport is so important, right? In any negotiation, building that human connection is so important, because people like to work with people that they like, you know
Imagine that.
right? Yeah, as obvious as it sounds, right? So that's why it's, for me, of course it's a balance, but I try to push as much as I can on the rapport and just this human connection. Any chance I get, I'll skew the conversation out of the business and talk more about the personal things. with the prospect and with anybody else I'm trying to connect, because it's first human connection, then business deal, always. That's why any chance I get, I'll fly into their city, to the client city, to meet with them for a lunch, to meet them in the office, to meet them anywhere in person,
Yep.
because that's another thing I use in negotiation, by the way, to close deals. Any chance I get, I'll meet with people in person.
Yep.
As much as they want to do it on Zoom, I say, hey, where are you? Oh, near town. Okay, I'll drive there. Oh, this. Oh, I'm flying there. I'll meet you there, right? Because this human connection, I'm probably more like 70% feeling, 30% analytical in my negotiations.
It's, people sometimes when they hear or talk about like, oh, well, I really like to build rapport in my negotiations, it's almost like it's perceived as like manipulative. And the reality of it is like, don't you want to do business with people that you like more? Right? Isn't that so? I think the irony of it is you really accomplish two things. You are A, getting the opportunity to be a nicer human being, which I think is much needed and everywhere. And B, I think you're deploying a more effective strategy. So I think it's a win-win. You get to be a nice human, and I think you close more deals. That's been my experience. It sounds like it's been yours too.
Exactly. Yeah. And you know what? I try to do it genuinely. It's not like a
No,
checkbox I have to mark, right? It's not a sales playbook that you need to have, right?
asked about their kids. Check.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. That's why I don't have a, when I get my new salespeople onboarded, especially if they're not so experienced, they ask me like, oh, what should I talk about in my small talk, right? Because I tell them have a small talk, at least, as much as you can in the beginning, and then they're like, what should I talk about? Well, whatever you feel like, because I don't have a playbook on this. You
Right.
see something, you see a painting on their wall, ask them about that painting. Like genuinely ask it though, like as a human, because maybe it's again natural to me because I'm a curious human being in my nature, and I just ask people questions. But it's also a built skill too. Anybody I think can build that skill of, as long as you're not checking boxes. It has to be natural and it has to be genuine, and just consider them, before talking. Every human being is unique, and it's your goal to just genuinely find out what makes them unique and what they're about, right? So then it's just going to happen. And it's again back to feelings conversation, right?
Yep.
Everybody feels if something is fake or natural. They may not understand it consciously, but subconsciously we all feel it when something is fake, right? So if you're just checking boxes, they're going to feel that. So you better make sure that you're genuinely interested and you don't have like a checkbox there.
And earlier when I say like what a concept, I say that half jokingly because it's been my experience. I won't put a number, but the majority of people, Sardor, they don't do that. And I think for me, naturally, with a background in mental health, to your point, I'm actually curious about the human condition. I'm curious about people's experiences in life, but I love how you call that out because really being in the moment with somebody, listening to what they're actually saying, showing true interest. Not only is that good for building relationships, but it's good for like building business relationships too, closing deals, right? Negotiating. If people think that you are really caring about what they're saying, that opens up all kinds of doors.
Exactly, yeah. And also it comes down to preparation as well,
Yeah.
especially if you're making a sales call. Make sure you spend some time researching the prospect and knowing about them, um, and not just come out and be cold, because then you'll also have some more topics to talk about, right? But yeah, it's intention first. You have the intention to be curious.
Yeah, one of our favorite guests that we've had on the show is Sam McKenna. She's a leading sales trainer, former LinkedIn executive. Do you know her?
No.
Okay,
I
so she's great, and she has a whole concept that she built on called "Show Me That You Know Me," and that's about like you don't really earn the right to talk to people about getting their business or whatever until you've taken some time to really get to know them, and that sounds exactly like what you're in line with, Sardor. Not only in doing the research but when you're talking to the person, actually getting to know them, asking genuine questions, being in the moment. Is that right?
Absolutely. Exactly. Yes. Yes. And that comes down to also like some technical aspects of it, like turning off all the notifications. Like
Yep.
put your phone, computer, everything and do not disturb during the call. So you don't get a call and you're not looking at Slack while talking to the person, you know.
I absolutely love it. You know, before we kind of wrap up here and I hear a bit more about what Jafton.com is doing, we talked about the emotions being 70% of it. I am fascinated to hear your answer to this because which I tend to agree with you on the 70%, but B, given that you're in this world of technology, let's talk about, for the final thing, let's talk about AI in negotiations. So AI obviously is, 50, it's 50 trillion parts to it. And what we say right now can change in 5 minutes, but specifically focused in on negotiations. Do you see any value there? Or I'll even open the question up wider and say, what thoughts in general do you have about AI and negotiations?
Yep. Yeah, great point. Actually, I was, uh, talking about that on the stage like a few weeks back
Okay.
at one of our AI events here that we host in Miami weekly. And then I do use it. I've tried it at least. You know, while AI cannot still be a human or conscious, right, and have the feelings, what it's really good at is just scraping data and looking at the best practices, right? So the source of its information is the human based information, human generated information, right? So short answer is yes, AI can help with negotiation. It won't be original perhaps, but what it's going to do is just you can ask it with the help of especially the plugins, the web plugin that the GPT-4 has now. You can just ask what are the top tactics, give it context, right? Give it a lot of context and then say, what is the top tactic I can use with it? And you can task it specifically saying, hey, I don't know, read Chris Wass's, Never Split the Difference and find me the best practice that's applicable for this specific case from this book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or read top 10 books on negotiation and tell me in my specific scenario, here's all the context on this client or whatnot that I'm having. What can I do, right? And it'll give you 10 ideas. And it's up to you then to choose which one you want to use, of course. But boy, can it help you be faster at just finding answers. Absolutely, right? It's not going to go and close the deal for you just yet, at least, but
Right now, yeah.
can it be a great assistant for you to define your strategy on negotiation? Absolutely.
Yeah, taking like large data sets or other pieces of information and really focusing that down in a way that the human, like you said for now, that the human can use to turn that bit into to turn a bit more into an art form. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. It's an assistant. It's a tool.
Yeah, yeah, I love that concept in general, and I see huge possibilities. Understatement of the year, of course, but every day I'm fascinated more and more. And in your world, you're light years ahead of what I see, so I'm sure you're equally, if not more, fascinated.
Absolutely.
So, Sardor, to wrap us up here, it's been absolutely amazing to have you. Let's hear a bit about Jafton.com or any projects. I mean, like you said earlier, when you're up on stage, I mean, I'd like to hear about what projects you have going on. I think you also mentioned weekly or monthly event too. So, yeah, whatever you have going on, I'd love to hear about it right now.
For sure. Yeah, thank you for that opportunity, Matt. So yeah, as you've probably guessed, Jafton is our main business, sort of like the cash cow that we have, right?
Mhm.
To sponsor everything else we're doing. But Jafton is actually part of our holding company
Okay.
called the Real Start LLC, in which we have multiple projects going on. So we have Miss.com, which is our product. It's a SaaS product for scheduling and appointment setting and paid appointments specifically. It's that niche
Okay.
for service providers. And then we have GP Tuesday, which is our weekly AI events on, you guessed it, AI, right? So every Tuesday in our office, we host event like meetups with a guest speaker that will present either their own project on AI or some kind of an interesting topic on AI every single week in person, right? And then we
Wow.
also, live stream on the web as well on our pages. But it's great. We're building community of AI specialists and enthusiasts, and it's been amazing for networking. And that's another piece of advice that I think I would recommend to everybody. Hosting events has been the single best thing for my networking. And meeting just amazing people. And unlike just attending regular events, which I still do, when you host your own event, you're the spotlight. You get you get to meet everybody, right? So that's been fascinating for me. And then we're working a few other projects right now. One is in generative AI. So as you probably guess, so agency is the cash cow, but we work on our own projects as well, not only client projects. So with our own internal team, we use them to build our own product that we want to launch. So one of them is in generative AI, and it's going to be the simplest way to build a landing page with one click, by just dropping a link to your project. The AI is going to read the project and generate you a landing page, a marketing landing page on that, basically, right? So
Wow. Okay. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's about to be launched around Q4 this year. That's something I'm very excited about. And then we have a few other things in discussion, like we want to launch a marketplace product where you're going to be able to not only get tailored apps or software, but buy existing software that's already pre-built. So time to market is going to be the value prop there, where you're going to be able to just purchase a product and we can customize it for you through our agency, but it's more of a product approach. So as you probably guessed, our strategies is to slowly, transition into a product business. Of course, we're not planning to kill our agency business. It's still going to be there. It's a great business, but for us, our more of a passion lies in product, right?
Are you utilizing a separate platform for people to contact you about your product, or is everybody kind of reaching out to you through your LinkedIn page, which, by the way, was very easy to find?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I'm trying to optimize that more. So, yeah, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn about everything else I'm doing. You can probably see all the projects going on there, right? That we've already announced. We have a second agency that we started a few years back called No Code Team, where we specialize in no code development for minimum viable products. So it's basically a way to launch an app or software 2-3 times faster than traditional development, and cheaper as well. So that's more for like startups, yeah. So everything else I'm doing, you can reach out to me on my LinkedIn. Just type in my first and last name, Sardor Akhmedov, and you'll see me there.
So I think probably after hearing this, I mean, I will tell you personally, I am thoroughly impressed with what you have accomplished. I said this to you in the beginning of the show before we were recording. Thoroughly impressed. You have so many things going on. I mean, do you subscribe to the whole theory of sleep? I mean, is this is this just a nonsense theory, or?
I'd say, like, can you remind me what it was, right? Actually, I'm glad you asked, because I am a very big advocate of sleep. I cannot function if I haven't gotten enough sleep. So
Same.
like, with all the things going on, I'm glad I was able to delegate a lot of it. So
Yeah.
probably I'm not as busy as you would think these days.
Sure.
I was probably a few years back when I was a bad delegator. Now I'm trying to get better at it. And my brain thinks in a way of like, not how do I get something done when I have an idea, but who do I get to do it?
Yep.
So, so you're in a driver mode, more like a, leadership mode than just the operator mode, right? This way. So I have enough time to sleep and do some more things. So I'm a huge advocate of it, and nobody should be sleep deprived. It's really bad for your health.
On so many levels. You're not doing anybody any good if you're just walking around like a zombie. So I appreciate that perspective. So yeah, everybody, Sardor Akhmedov, and again, just like it's spelled here on the screen, found him with no problem on LinkedIn. Not always the case. Sometimes people are hard to find, but Sardor is there if you want to reach out to him. So before we wrap up, any closing thoughts, Sardor?
No, I really enjoyed it, Matt. Thank you so much for having me on. Honestly, it's probably one of the top 3 podcasts I've been on. Not gonna lie, really, I enjoyed it. Like I said, I enjoy when it goes more specific on the topic. So I do hope, with all this said, to come back to you maybe in sometime in the future and and share more experiences and more tactics and learnings I've gotten in negotiation, because there's tons of books on it, but you don't get to really learn it until you try it. So I'm gonna keep improving my negotiation skills, and I hope to share more lessons in the future.
Fair enough. And I will also confess to you that likewise, not just trying to be gregarious, but you're absolutely one of my top three favorite guests as well, too. I've
Thank you.
really enjoyed this. And I always make a rule. I mean, if I'm the smartest guy in the room, I run fast. But I'm not the smartest guy in this room. It's you. And so you will not be hearing the last from me, sir. We will be in contact. There's lots of synergy and collaboration here. So I 1000% enjoyed this as well. And we'll be in contact. So.
Thank you,
So
Matt.
with that, everybody, thank you much. Thank you so much for tuning in again, Sardor Akhmedov. And you do not want to haggle with this guy over the price of a tomato. I promise you, it will not end well for you. Thanks, everybody.